With Marathon's second season right around the corner, this feels like the perfect time to finally release a proper review of the game. I spent a lot of time gathering my thoughts and thinking about how I wanted to structure this video, because Marathon is a game I've been looking forward to for years. And even though I genuinely feel like I'm the exact target audience for a game like this, and that Marathon was made for the type of player I am, I still want this review to be as grounded and objective as possible. There has been a lot of discussion surrounding this game, both before launch and even still today. Especially now, with Bungie ending active development on Destiny 2 and shifting more focus towards Marathon moving forward. But for a video like this, none of that really matters. Now, more than ever, the only thing that truly matters is whether the game itself is actually good. So this is a review of the game itself, and only the game, as it should be. Throughout its first few weeks, I spent over 200 hours playing Marathon, got well beyond level 100, but eventually stopped playing for a variety of reasons. And I will talk about those reasons later in the video. So with all of that in mind, I want to start this review by talking about the world Bungie created for Marathon. So let's get right into it. I think it's safe to say that world design is one of, if not the most important aspect of a game. If the world you're playing in feels uninspired or boring, you probably won't want to spend hundreds or even thousands of hours in it. Bungie has always been great at creating immersive worlds, and I genuinely think they achieved that again with Marathon while still building upon the foundation of the original games from the 90s. I was immersed from the very first moment and immediately loved the incredibly unique art style Bungie went for here, which they describe as graphic realism. I understand that the art style is a polarizing topic and it's completely fine to dislike it. But in the past, gaming studios were often criticized for playing it too safe, instead of trying something new and different. Bungie clearly created something unique here, and I genuinely think they nailed it for a game like this. It's a world that feels unlike anything else out there. It's believable, immersive, and never gets boring to explore. Through environmental storytelling, you constantly pick up small bits of information about what happened on Tau Ceti. Everything you experience slowly builds this feeling that something went horribly wrong here long before you arrive. Visually, Marathon, in my eyes, absolutely matches the modern standard for a game of this scale. A big reason why I was so excited for the game was to experience its world and get immersed in it. And it's still one of the main reasons I honestly can't wait to jump back into it. Aside from the visuals though, the audio design in Marathon is also impressive. The soundtrack creates this constant feeling of tension and mystery, while everything combined greatly enhances the immersion and atmosphere of the game. The audio does an incredible job of pulling you deeper into the world and making every moment feel intense. Overall, there were many moments where I genuinely felt like I was experiencing the exact same world and its atmosphere that Bungie showed to us in the official announcement trailer and cinematic. That's a great achievement, and they deserve credit for that. But the world itself is only one part of the experience. What really keeps us engaged long-term are the progression systems and, more importantly, the gameplay itself. So let's talk about that. Marathon is a PvPvE extraction shooter, which means that it's part of a genre that a lot of people probably won't be attracted to. The idea of spending your time getting loot, only to then probably losing it again, is simply not appealing to a lot of people. And I get that. You have to stay focused and play intentionally most of the time. You have to be careful and think about your engagements. And once a fight starts, you need to stay calm and make the right decisions. Not everyone wants to play a game that demands this much focus all of the time. But because of its nature as an extraction shooter, you gain advantages when bringing in better gear. If you simply have a better weapon or stronger shield, there is a much higher chance of you surviving and winning your engagement. And that's where the risk versus reward aspect comes into play, which is ultimately what makes games like this so appealing to people who enjoy them. Because every decision matters, every fight matters, every successful extraction matters. The tension only exists because there is actually something on the line. In order to enjoy this kind of experience though, you have to accept that death is part of the journey. You have to fail to succeed. Marathon, especially at the beginning, is not only hard, but brutal. And I understand that this can feel incredibly frustrating. But you know what other popular genre this also applies to? Souls-likes. I'm convinced that a lot of the same principles why people don't want to try extraction shooters are also the reason many people didn't even want to touch a Dark Souls game back in the days. The fun begins when you understand the flow of the game, when you get to know the systems in place that help you progress, when you get rewarded for your game knowledge. Marathon's seasonal progression mainly revolves around the 5 factions, which you level up by completing contracts and earning experience. There are repeatable contracts with simpler tasks, but there are also priority contracts for each faction, which function as dedicated questlines with more unique objectives. I honestly enjoyed most of my time completing the priority contracts because they send you to parts of the map you otherwise would maybe never visit, and they reward you with cutscenes and additional storytelling. I also appreciate that the objectives that you have to complete make sense narratively. I know not everybody feels the same way about this, and I personally didn't complete every priority contract either, since some of them can be quite difficult or time-consuming, but honestly, I don't really mind that, because it means there is still something left for me to discover the next time I play. All contracts grant you not only experience, but also loot that thematically matches the faction. For example, you get healing items from NULLCOMA, or explosives from Mida. I think that's great. Leveling up your factions also ties directly into the upgrade system. Every faction has its own progression system where you can unlock permanent upgrades for the rest of the season. You need all kinds of different materials to unlock those upgrades, and as you progress, those materials increase in rarity, which makes sense. The variety of upgrades is quite honestly enormous, and they improve almost every aspect of the gameplay experience. I think this is a very well thought out system that is not only satisfying to progress through, but also makes sense narratively because it's tied directly to the factions and their purpose within the world. The more you level up your factions and unlock upgrades, the more items become available through the barter system. Together, the upgrade and barter system create a skill gap because they force you to think carefully about how you spend your materials and optimize your progression. Another layer of progression comes from the Codex. It basically functions as Marathon's long-term progression and achievement system. It tracks all kind of things: exploration, collectibles, combat milestones, endgame accomplishments, and lore discoveries, while rewarding you with cosmetics, titles, banners, and other permanent unlocks that carry over between seasons. Now that we've covered the progression system, let's talk about how the actual runs work. Because what really gives Marathon its own identity within the extraction genre is the pacing of the rounds themselves and the incentives built around them. In other games of the genre, you oftentimes load into a round with a goal like opening a key room or finishing a quest, and then immediately want to leave because the longer the round goes, there is less to do. And you don't want to lose your stuff, right? And don't get me wrong, of course that's also the case in Marathon. There are moments where you just want to extract relatively early, sure. But what makes this game special is that the longer the round goes, the better the loot becomes. There are dedicated events that start happening, and many of them only start to appear later into the run and often force you to rotate between multiple points of interest. Some of the events you first have to discover, which also usually takes time. And all of that while other players on the map are most likely trying to do the exact same thing. There were definitely some issues that made certain maps feel less exciting over time, but Bungie already started addressing some of that with new events and activities in recent updates, which honestly makes me optimistic for the future. All of this is happening on 4 different kind of maps. You start Marathon with access to the map's perimeter and diamage before eventually unlocking Outpost and Cryo Archive at a later stage of a game. And it only makes sense that as you progress through those maps, the difficulty and complexity increases. But so does the quality of the loot. Every map feels unique not only because of its visual identity, but because of how differently each one plays. And honestly, for now, I think the amount and variety of maps is completely fine. Now that we've talked about how Marathon actually plays, let's move on to the next topic, which is combat. One thing almost everybody can agree on is that Bungie knows how to make FPS combat feel good. And Marathon is no exception. There are currently 29 different weapons in the game, all with their own characteristics, strength and use cases, and all of them feel satisfying to use. But gunplay is only one part of the equation. Another major aspect of Marathon's combat identity is the runner shell you're using. There are currently 7 different runner shells in the game, with another one being added next season. Each one has their own abilities, role and playstyle that you can further customize through implants and cores. I personally had the most fun with Thief early on, but the more I played, the more I found myself switching between different shells because they all offer something unique. But combat is also where some of Marathon's biggest frustrations started appearing throughout the season. We have to talk about balance. And that is something Bungie constantly had to battle with and will most likely continue to deal with moving forward. The reality is that we'll probably never reach a point where everything feels perfectly balanced. But there were moments where I genuinely didn't want to play the game anymore because some of those issues were simply too frustrating to deal with. And while I could probably go into more detail here, what ultimately matters is that Bungie addressed many of those issues that the community was vocal about, and I firmly believe that the game is now far more enjoyable from a balancing standpoint than it was at launch. And honestly, that really makes me excited for the new season. Overall, I really like how combat feels and plays out moment to moment, both in PvP and PvE. As someone who spent a huge amount of time playing Apex over the years, a lot of Marathon's engagements honestly feel very familiar in a good way. The time to kill feels somewhat comparable, and the healing system also feels familiar with still having its own identity. Overall, I feel like a lot of the skills I developed over the years in different kind of games transfer very well into Marathon. However, one of my biggest frustrations, especially in the endgame, was how heavily engagements became focused around utility and equipment spam, instead of actually using your gun. Bubble shields, grenades, and especially the self-res often made fights feel way too chaotic, less predictable, and honestly just not very fun to engage with. But to Bungie's credit, they already made some important changes, and hopefully continue to do so, in order to make gunfights revolve more around positioning, mechanics, tactical thinking, and raw gun skills. A lot of the recent balancing changes already moved the game into a much healthier direction, and honestly, that's exactly the direction I want Marathon to move forward to. When it comes to PvE engagements, I'm mostly satisfied with how combat plays out overall. The enemy AI behaves unpredictably enough that I was often surprised when it turned out not to be a real player creeping up on me or pushing me. That unpredictability adds a lot to the tension and atmosphere of the game. You genuinely have to think carefully about your engagements. So honestly, when it comes to PvE, the main thing I want to see moving forward is simply more enemy variety. So with combat covered, let's move on and talk about the endgame. Every game that wants to keep players engaged long term needs some kind of meaningful endgame system. And from what I've experienced, Marathon already has enough appealing systems in place even for the most ambitious players. The real centerpiece of Marathon's endgame content is Cryo Archive. And honestly, I really think it might be one of Bungie's most ambitious pieces of endgame content ever. Even though most of my own experiences there were incredibly frustrating, I still think the overall design is extremely impressive. I think what Bungie created with Cryo Archive is true endgame content that can keep even the most ambitious and dedicated players engaged for a very long time. And let me explain why I think that. In order to reach the compiler, which is currently Marathon's final encounter, you first have to gain access to 6 different vaults and collect their dedicated AI subroutines. That alone creates a massive incentive to keep playing, because accessing those vaults require keycards that can drop from all kind of different activities, events and locations across every map in the game. And some of them are especially hard to find. However, the progress you make toward collecting all of those subroutines carries over between seasons. And that is the real reason I call this true endgame content. Because even highly invested players, myself included, will not necessarily be able to collect every subroutine within a single season. And honestly, when I first came to that realization, I was pretty frustrated, because it meant I would probably not be able to complete everything Marathon had to offer during its first season. But over time, I started appreciating how challenging that system actually is. And even if it won't appeal to everyone, I genuinely respect Bungie for creating endgame content that feels this ambitious. In addition to that, there is the already mentioned codex, where you can spend a huge amount of time unlocking achievements while earning titles, cosmetics and other rewards that reflect your progress. And there is also a rank mode, which sadly at least right now wasn't very appealing to me because it feels somewhat underdeveloped and still suffered from many of the balancing issues I mentioned earlier. Despite all the praise I've given the game so far, Marathon absolutely still has problems that need to be addressed. So let's talk about those. Server and netcode problems were absolutely frustrating at times. There were moments with rubber banding, melee hits not registering properly, or bullets simply not connecting the way they should. And in a game where death can cost you everything you brought into a run, issues like that become incredibly frustrating very quickly. Another major issue for me was the performance. I play Marathon in 4K on a very high-end PC with an RTX 5090 and a powerful processor. My system is very optimized for gaming, but especially on maps like Outpost and Cryo Archive, performance sometimes dropped below 90 FPS. Meanwhile, maps like Perimeter and Dire Marsh ran completely fine. At first I assumed it was because I was streaming and recording simultaneously, but even without that workload, performance still was nowhere near where I expected it to be. From what I've heard though, the game actually performs fairly well on consoles and lower to mid-range PCs, which is obviously good. But Bungie definitely still needs to improve optimization for high-end hardware. Cheating also became a noticeable issue throughout the season, especially in endgame content. I personally can't say this was a huge issue for me because I don't think I encountered many cheaters myself, but from what I've seen and heard from the community, it definitely became a reoccurring problem. We already knew that this would probably become an issue because there is no multiplayer game out there without a cheating problem. Hopefully Bungie manages to improve the situation over time because many people still seem to be very unhappy with the state of the anti-cheat. But beyond of the technical issues, bugs and balancing problems, there is still one thing missing in the game that genuinely hurts the experience for me. We need a firing range. I think it's a big missed opportunity that Bungie didn't give us a place to damage test weapons, experiment with our builds and especially warm up before jumping into a run. I know this is probably not something we can expect very soon, but I can't stress enough how important the firing range would be for this game. I spent countless hours in Apex's firing range, warming up, practicing movement, learning recoil patterns, getting familiar with the weapons or doing 1v1s. A game like Marathon desperately needs this. So, after all of that, what do I actually think about Marathon? For me, it's easily the best new multiplayer FPS game released in the past 5 years. I've already spent a huge amount of time with it and I'm looking forward to playing a lot more in the future. I love the difficulty, I love the atmosphere, and I appreciate Bungie for creating a game that clearly isn't trying to appeal to everyone. I'm also incredibly impressed with how the development team handles community feedback and communication. And despite all the criticism surrounding the game online, I absolutely think Marathon deserves a place alongside other major FPS titles. I really hope more people are willing to give the game a fair chance. Because I don't think Marathon is nearly as difficult to get into as many people make it out to be. A lot of it simply comes down to perspective. Like I mentioned earlier, I really like the comparison to Souls-likes. The more you play, the more everything starts to click. However, the reality is that Marathon is still very intense, demanding, and sometimes exhausting to play for long periods of time. And honestly, I eventually realized that this is probably one of the reasons why I stopped playing much earlier than I originally expected. I will absolutely be playing future seasons, and I'm highly motivated to spend more time in Cryo Archive to hopefully finally defeat the compiler. But overall, what I realized is that Marathon simply isn't a game I can play every single day. And honestly, I think that's completely fine. Another issue I have with Marathon is that from a game design perspective, it is heavily focused around having a consistent group to play with. Don't get me wrong, I also actually enjoy the solo experience in Marathon, but only up to a certain point, because at its core, the game is clearly designed around coordinated 3v3 team play. There is no solo queue for Cryo Archive, and being consistent with random teammates is impossible. Sure, you might occasionally have a good experience and maybe even clear a vault, but realistically you most likely won't be able to kill the compiler if you don't have a consistent team. And that eventually becomes a problem if you don't have that. We will have to see where things go in the future, especially since Bungie recently mentioned in a blog post that they want to build different survival experiences for different modes, including pure PvP, PvE and PvP light experiences. As long as it brings in new players without losing the core experience that Marathon has to offer right now, I think that's not only fine but necessary. I also have my own ideas for what I think Marathon needs, but that's something I'll talk about in another video. I absolutely want to keep creating videos around this game, and I hope this video ages well and maybe even encourages some new players to give Marathon a chance. I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video with someone who maybe still isn't fully convinced by the game. And lastly, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What you liked, what you disliked, or what you agreed or disagreed with. If you enjoyed the video, leaving a like would really help the video reach more people interested in Marathon. And honestly, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I genuinely appreciate it. Until next time, bye bye.